Hello, everyone, and welcome to our webinar today, an analysis on manufacturing capacity landscape and scaling strategies for fermentation-derived protein. This is an analysis by the Good Food Institute in collaboration with Integration Consulting. My name is Adam Leman. I'm the lead scientist in fermentation here at GFI, and I'm happy to present this analysis to you today. First, a quick introduction. I'll introduce to you GFI. It'll be followed by an introduction on fermentation for alternative proteins, emerging technologies and products. Then we'll dig into the analysis, manufacturing capacity landscape and scaling strategies, and we'll finish with conclusions and recommendations, followed by a Q&A. The Good Food Institute is a 501c3 nonprofit developing the roadmap for alternative proteins and a sustainable, secure, and just protein supply. And we focus on three key areas of work: science and technology to advance foundational open access research on alternative proteins, and generating a thriving research and training ecosystem for these industries. In corporate engagement, where we partner with companies and investors across the investment scales to accelerate innovation and scale up the supply chain for alternative proteins. And finally, in policy, where we advocate for fair policy and public research funding for alternative proteins. We're over 180 staff in 6 regions and local affiliates across the world. So a big question that we have is, how will we feed 10 billion people, or close to 10 billion people, by 2050? We're going to have to do this sustainably. Industrialized animal agriculture is in the top 2 to 3 most significant contributors to the world's most pressing environmental issues. Industrialized animal ag is responsible for almost 15% of the greenhouse gas emissions worldwide, a higher share than the entire transport sector. We need to do this efficiently, and I'll get into this a little bit in the next few slides. But over 75% of agricultural land is used for raising and feeding livestock. However, that only provides about 1/3 of our global protein supply. And lastly, we need to do this safely. Animals in the United States consume more than twice the antibiotics than humans do. And based on medical experts, we predict over 10 million annual deaths from antimicrobial resistance in 2050, which will be a 14-fold increase over current deaths. None of these are scenarios that we would like to see happen by 2050. However, we're seeing that globally, meat demand continues to rise due to industrialization and population increases. From 1961 to projections to 2050, we're seeing over 5 times increase in animal protein demand. And this, given our present state of agricultural land use and growing demands, is not going to be a sustainable way to use to produce protein for the future. If we look at poultry, 8 calories can go into a chicken to get 1 calorie out for human nutrition. In pigs, it's 11 calories in to 1 calorie out. For cows, it's 34 calories in to 1 calorie out. Increases in demand and then increases in animal agriculture will strain our global agricultural system to the breaking point and lead to a demand that can't be met by our global limits. Currently, 29% of the earth is land, of which 71% is currently habitable. 50% of that land goes to agriculture, whereas I mentioned before, over 75% goes to animal agriculture, but we only get 33% from of our protein supply from these sources. So we need better, more effective, more sustainable, more efficient ways of producing protein for human consumption. Enter microbes. Fermentation organisms are microbial factories, and microbes can produce proteins in a fraction of the time and with a small amount of space compared to animals. Some biomass fermentation processes can be measured in hours. The calories in, or carbon inputs, are relatively low compared to animal proteins, and they're getting better all the time with new technologies. And many of the required inputs can be made sustainably. Electricity can use renewable energy as an input to fermentation systems. Water within these facilities can be recycled or multi-use. And we're getting better at finding new innovations in feedstocks, either agricultural, food system waste, or side streams that can be used by these microbes as fuel. Fermentation is a diverse collection of approaches rather than just one production method to make protein. At GFI, we consider the use of bacteria, yeast fungi, filamentous and mycelial fungi, microalgae, and other microbes that can be used to produce biomass or precision protein products. Biomass products are products where the entire cell is used, minimally processed, and then formulated into a protein source. Precision involves the production through a microbe of a particular ingredient, which is then isolated away from the rest of the fermentation and then used as an ingredient in food. And you can use precision to either take microbially derived ingredients or use recombinant approaches to make animal source proteins, but use microbial productions to make them, making them in an animal-free way. Because of the promise of fermentation as an approach to produce alternative proteins, we've seen an enormous expansion in the number of companies that are geared towards making alternative proteins or other ingredients by fermentation. We know that by the end of 2022, there were at least 136 companies using fermentation approaches to produce alternative proteins. Along with this increase in companies, there's been an increase in alternative protein investment. And we see almost $15 billion has been invested cumulatively for all pillars of alternative proteins: cultivated meat, plant-based, and fermentation. Of that, over $4.2 billion has been devoted to fermentation. So there are lots of new companies that are devoted to research and development and scaling up alternative proteins using fermentation-derived approaches, and there's investment to back it up. With this investment and with this expansion of companies, we see that ideas and ideation of new fermentation products have progressed to the point where they're being heavily researched and developed, and many are on the verge or within scale up and commercialization. This transition between R&D to commercialization is known as the Valley of Death, and companies need the appropriate fermentation capacity to cross this Valley of Death. They need fermentation facilities that are capable of helping them go through scale up to optimize their bioprocess, and then finally to begin to commercialize their products and sell them, and then to expand that commercialization to achieve market success. And in the light of this particular issue, we sought to understand the fermentation capacity status as it is here in 2023, and understand what the pathways towards expansion of fermentation capacity could be to help this industry achieve an increase in the resources that are available to producers. And thus our manufacturing capacity analysis was developed and then researched. So our manufacturing capacity landscape and scaling strategies for fermentation-derived protein analysis is out today at this link here at the bottom. And before we go on, we'd like to acknowledge the authors of this report. On the GFI side, I was joined by Amanda Bess and Simon Costa, and then through Integration Consulting, Julian, Lempp, Dominic Sylvester, Sarah Rodriguez, and Nick Gemmel contributed. And we wouldn't be able to have done this analysis without contributions from industry experts across the value chain. There are over 30 interviews with lots of industry experts who are able to provide insight and help guide this analysis along. So we'd like to thank them for their help and their resources. And with that, I'd like to turn it over to Julian at Integration, who will walk us through the rest of the analysis and pathways forward.
Perfect. Thank you very much, Adam. Very nice to be here on this webinar together. Seeing good morning, good afternoon, good evening to the audience, seen from Chile to Taiwan. We've seen people participating here. So quick word about myself. My name is Julian. I'm a Senior Director for Integration Consulting based in our Munich office. As you can see here, we're a global international strategy and management consulting company with over 25 years of experience, a lot of that in the food and beverage sector, where we have focused quite a bit, especially in the recent years with all of the things that are happening there. Our clients include really multinationals down to startups in the sector. Some of the example, some of the projects that we've recently been supporting our clients was, for example, supporting a plant-based meat company in bringing their products to new markets, designing a circular economy model for packaging companies to reduce waste, or creating a disruptive roadmap for a cultured meat client to win in selected markets globally. And now very happy that we had this opportunity here to write this report with GFI and also to present these first results here and give an overview of our report. So going into the report and how it is built, it's in the following structure. We have divided our report into two different blocks that you can see here, and that will sort of drive our presentation in the next hour. So on the one side, we're looking at the existing landscape of manufacturing capacity in fermentation-derived protein production. So that is the first block. And then secondly, we are looking into strategies on how players in this industry can scale manufacturing. So we're looking at different types of aspects of these strategies. On the one side, the type of fermentation, biomass and precision fermentation. What are the deciding factors to scale and how to scale up from lab size all the way up to commercial size? How to do that? So either build your own facility or partner with a third party, a CMO to do so. What are the advantages and disadvantages of that? What about equipment? So should you go for new equipment or existing equipment to retrofit that and use it moving forward? And also, what are the parallel industries that can be leveraged to sort of move and help moving these capacities? So this is the overview. And if we go into the scope, you see here, we looked into both sides of fermentation. On the one side, biomass fermentation, solid and liquid, as well as a liquid precision fermentation. So this was the scope of our report, and this is what we're looking at. Secondly, within the value chain of fermentation, we're looking especially into the steps of production and processing, meaning that the upstream part of input into the fermentation and the downstream part towards the finished product, we did not look into, but we really focused in the middle part of the value chain here. And last but not least, we did make a distinction, because you see in this area, in this industry, there's a lot of different names for different type of production. So if we're talking in this report, we're talking about the lab size of production, which means everything up to 1,000 liters of fermentation capacity. Really, this is about small scale setup, focusing mainly on R&D. Before then going into the demo size, this is up to 100,000 liters. So this is a bit larger. We're talking about ramping up production and really going towards standard production. And then last but not least, commercial size capacities would be everything over 100,000 liters. That is really about continuous manufacturing and commercial manufacturing. So now I think we're moving into the next phase. Thank you very much, Dom. Going over to you.
Thanks, Julian. Hi, everyone. My name is Dominic, and I'm a senior consultant at Integration. Just before I start and go into it, I want to encourage people to send their questions to the Q&A tab so that we can answer them at the end. So looking at the first section of this report, this really focuses on the manufacturing landscape for fermentation-derived protein. And this is really where we conducted most of our quantitative analysis. Looking at this next slide, really this illustrates the main data sets we use for the report. So just wanted to set some foundations here of where the data came from and how we used it. So this analysis was based upon two main data sets, which we consolidated from publicly available databases, specifically for the purposes of this report. So one of these databases or data sets focused on contract manufacturing organizations, or CMOs, or third-party manufacturers, and which we consolidated using the Capacitor and Pilots View databases. And just wanted to say these are two very useful resources and two which you should also check out. We also had another data set which focused on producers. And here, when we talk about producers, we were referring to B2C or B2B companies that manufacture and sell fermentation-derived products. This was a consolidation of GFI's own database, but it also complemented with inputs from Bright Green Partners, the Protein Report, and Plant Food Association. And I think importantly to recognize here that we also ensured that we were not double counting in any of these data sets, as in fact, some of these producers will in fact outsource their manufacturing to CMOs. In the next slide, we're showing the process for defining the data set for producers specifically. Our report provides more depth on these producers due to the lack of consolidated data available at this time. For CMOs, there are already some useful databases out there which have a focus on fermentation-derived products. And we've just previously mentioned them, but Capacitor and Pilots View. And as you can see here, for the producers data set, once the databases were consolidated, we completed a step-by-step process to filter for the relevant companies. So we went all the way from 2,285 companies, which we captured and recognized as the whole alternative protein universe, the number of companies within that. And from that, we were able to identify 102 fermentation-derived producers, including biomass and precision producers here. It's important to note, though, here that this does not include any CMOs, as that is covered by the other data sets, or service or equipment providers. So purely the producers here. If we look at now the next two slides, we want to look at a little bit of the composition of these producers in some more detail. I think importantly first, notably 82 out of 102, or 79% of these companies are either pure play B2B or a combination of B2B and B2C. And really here, this aligns with the fact that precision fermentation products are primarily used as ingredients. We can also see that in terms of their scale, there's a pyramid-like distribution, with 46% of these companies at lab scale and only 21% at commercial. But despite only representing 21% of the total companies, the commercial scale facilities represent around 90% of total fermenter capacity, highlighting the concentration of this capacity. In terms of manufacturing strategy, and when we mention manufacturing strategy here, we're really referring to whether they are outsourcing to CMOs or have in-house manufacturing capacity. And really here, we see a reliance on CMOs for production at lab scale, with only 23% of companies with in-house fermentation capacity. But as companies scale, they seem to bring their manufacturing in-house, as 86% of their capacity is owned at commercial scale. If we go to the next slide and we turn our attention to the geographic distribution of these producers, as illustrated here, our analysis revealed a higher concentration of producers in Europe, accounting for 49% of the total number. Really, this is followed closely, as you can see, by North America with 32%. However, there's a noticeable lack and a big gray area here at all scales in Latin America, Africa, and Asia Pacific regions. And really, we believe this to be down to increased demand from the European and North American markets at this time, and the emphasis placed on biotechnology-related projects, either this being via academic programs or governmental support, really accelerating the development of these fermentation facilities. Now, if we bring back the two data sets in conjunction, so the one for the CMOs and the other one for the producers, we're able to calculate both the current volumetric capacity in liters and also the annual output potential in tons. I think important to recognize in this slide that due to not having perfectly granular data for each and every facility, one of the key inputs for the volumetric capacity calculation was to understand the average capacity by scale. So due to the focus of producers, and generally speaking here, we can see them classifying themselves in kind of a linear growth pattern here, so lab, demo, or commercial scale. And really we can calculate the average per each of those scales. So as you can see here, we see that a producer with in-house capacity operating at commercial scale is actually 450 times larger than a lab scale operation. For CMOs though, it's a bit of a different story. So really here, we saw that CMOs can operate at different scales due to the range of equipment and facilities they have available. And I think in fact here, 74% of CMOs self-classified themselves by more than one scale. So either lab and demo or commercial and demo, etc. And therefore we had to look at their average size by crossing the different scales. So that's why you see the Venn diagram figure there. And as expected here, on average, the largest facilities are the ones that are able to operate at all scales. So averaging 634,000 litres of capacity, the ones which are able to provide lab, demo, and commercial facilities and equipment. Using this information, we are able also, and again, using different data here, but using one of those inputs as the average volumetric capacity, we're able to estimate the total volumetric capacity for fermentation-derived protein products. And really here, we see this approximately being 16 million litres. And this is important to recognize. We're considering food exclusive CMOs and in-house manufacturing producers. In this, we observed a 50-50 split between producers with in-house manufacturing capabilities and food exclusive CMOs. So 7.5 million litres for producers and 8.2 million litres for CMOs. We also calculated an upper bound figure considering CMOs who manufacture food grade products, as well as industrial or pharma products. These categories typically, though, involve manufacturing higher margin products. And I think one example here we can take from pharmaceutical, where you can often expect profit margins around 70%. And really, these profit margins pose a challenge for fermentation-derived product manufacturers in terms of accessing these facilities. So this really suggests that the estimated functional capacity is matching much closer to the lower bound figure of 16 million litres. Again, if we look at this geographically, we can see a very similar pattern as before. So really 81% of capacity is concentrated in North America and Europe, less within other regions. By converting this fermenter capacity into an annual output in tons, we can gain insights into the potential production scale of fermentation-derived products. Our analysis indicates that the current fermenter capacity could produce between 0.4 and 2.8 million metric tons of alternative protein products annually. And really with this, when we take a reference, this estimate falls within the global range for global consumption for alternative meat and seafood products in 2022. Clearly a substantial figure here. And I think here, it's very important to call out here, this suggests that simple volumetric capacity is not necessarily a limiting factor. It's important to consider, though, other factors. And there is quite possibly what we see a mismatch between current manufacturing capacity in terms of scale, in terms of technical capabilities, and also the geographic distribution of production capacity compared to the demand and local needs of stakeholders in this nascent industry. This highlights the importance of aligning production capabilities with market demands and regional requirements. I'm going to hand back now to Julian to introduce the second section of the report.
Thank you very much, Dom. So as we have seen now an overview of the current capacities in the industry, we would like to go into the second part, which is about how should industry players go about if they want to expand their capacity in this area. And now the first part, or the first type that we're looking into, is overarchingly, what are the 6 key decision factors that we need to consider or should consider when defining a production strategy. So this has been, the outcome of a lot of interviews, talking to experts, seeing this industry really from all angles. And we see there are 6 decision factors when when defining your strategy. The first, and obviously a very obvious one, is costs. So there are different types of cost models behind the strategies that we're going to introduce in a minute. It's a big part of how much money can you actually spend, do you want to spend to expand your capacity here. Skills and expertise also is an important factor. What kind of skill and expertise are in-house? What does your company need from an external partner, ensuring that the capacity is really being able to use and up and running. Lead time is a third factor. So of course, it's a lot faster moving, for example, with a partner rather than building up your own capacities. There are different options regarding equipment and these sort of things that have an impact on the timeline of scaling up your capacity. Regarding and connected to costs is the financing topic. So of course, finances play a huge role and sort of drive strategy quite a bit. Process and product ownership is another factor that we have looked into, meaning that intellectual property, of course, is a topic. What should be kept in-house, what can be taken to a CMO, what do I want to share with partners, what kind of equipment do I need, these sort of things. And then last but not least, the value chain connectivity. So how integrated and how connected am I, or do I want to be with the rest of the industry and the rest of the value chain? So this is kind of overarchingly the main factors that we see that should be taken into account. And now we're going to go through these individual topics here that you see here on this screen or on the slide. And we will start with the next chapter, meaning looking into the decision whether you should or should not invest in own capacities and own equipment, or whether it would make more sense to partner up with a CMO in this area. And here, as you can see there, we had a look into the different sizes, the lab, the demo, commercial, but also the different technologies, biomass and precision fermentation. And the first outcome that we see is that on solid biomass fermentation, we don't really see any sort of significant capacity in terms of CMOs. So meaning that in this direction, scaling up in this solid biomass capacity, it would mean that the company would really need to invest in own equipment, own capacities, as there are no CMOs really off the shelf that can provide this sort of service. Looking into the liquid part of fermentation, what we see here in general on the biomass side and the precision side is that the bigger you go, the more sense it makes to sort of have your own investments and have your own capacities. On the one side, when starting and really building up and being on the lab level, there's a lot of advantages of partnering up with a CMO, given that there's a lot of skills and expertise already there to ramp up quickly. It's a lot faster because the equipment is already there. It normally runs very well, so it's a matter of getting to results quickly. Once we move more towards the commercial size and the commercial production of these products, we see that it makes more and more sense to sort of go into and invest into own capacities. Given that we have economies of scale, it's much cheaper to sort of produce on your own. Normally on these scales, you want to have your skills and expertise in-house. Intellectual property is a much bigger topic in this area. So meaning that we see in general, the bigger you go, the larger you want to have your capacities, the more sense it usually makes to go and invest in your own facility. And we can see that on the next slide with a cost overview that we did here. And really what we did, we had a look at the production volume and then the individual unit costs. And of course, it's, as you would expect, economies of scale sort of accelerate our cost reduction the higher the volume goes, meaning that this can be most leveraged if you invest in your own. So you see those two graphs sort of going down for precision and biomass fermentation. If you do your own manufacturing, the CapEx and the OpEx unit costs really go down by quite a bit. And around the demo and commercial size, we see that there's a threshold where normally it makes much more sense to invest into own facilities rather than partnering up with a CMO. Right from a cost perspective, there might be other parts of the decision that is outside of cost, but just from a cost perspective, this is sort of what we see in scaling up your capacities.
Thanks again, Julian. So if the decision is to build your own facility, so really we looked at then CMO versus own facility. And if you're picking the decision to build your own facility, really would consider the second decision is whether to retrofit or buy new. And there are success cases for retrofits out there. And this is really whether it's developing a whole site or utilizing previously used equipment. There are some clear advantages. And as with the decision to partner with a CMO facility or build your own, this is another decision that needs careful consideration, considering the 6 key decision factors. So going into the next slide here, here we highlight the advantages and the challenges associated with retrofitting. And really here, there are several advantages to retrofits. And generally speaking, these are associated with a saving of time and or money. And there are several examples to prove this can be the case. This can enable early stage technologies to become viable, as it does not require high upfront investments, generally speaking. It has to be said, though, this does vary, and retrofit in itself can be quite costly. Additionally, retrofitting can significantly reduce time to market, saving on lead time for the production of equipment or construction. However, it's important to acknowledge that these advantages are not universally applicable, and there are challenges such as the varying condition of equipment that can be taken from parallel industries, the specific technological requirements for product innovation, the necessity for expertise in retrofitting for specific needs, and also the costs and logistics involved in retrofitting, and in some cases, actually transporting the large equipment that is necessary. And I think this really should not be ignored. And given the level of technological complexity involved, we would really consider retrofitting currently as only viable for biomass rather than precision fermentation. Looking at the next slide here, as we've done exactly the same for the decision to partner with a CMO or build your own facility, we've consolidated the current tendency to retrofit, considering both scale of production and method of fermentation. So you can see on the side, lab and demo versus commercial, and biomass, both solid and liquid, and precision liquid as well. So looking at these, if we look at this by scale, first of all, so lab, demo, or commercial, generally speaking, early stage companies, those at lab and demo scale, are more likely to consider retrofitting equipment due to resource constraints and the need to bootstrap their operations. If we also view this decision by fermentation method deployed, we can see it's clearly only a viable option for biomass fermentation. As mentioned previously, experts that we interviewed as part of the process for the report expressed skepticism about the technical feasibility and economic viability of retrofitting for precision fermentation. This tends to be down to its complex technical requirements for both fermentation and downstream processing. And this is really regardless of the scale of production. So lab and demo and commercial are all quite challenging when it comes to precision fermentation and retrofit. It's crucial, though, to carefully consider the current scale of production and the level of technological complexity in order to understand whether retrofit is a viable option. And really, over the next couple of slides, we want to provide some more detail regarding the time and cost advantages of retrofit. So if we look at the next slide, here we show some estimates of the time required for retrofitting compared to purchasing new equipment. And here we see that biomass-focused companies reported that retrofitting can take up to 6 months for lab and demo scale operations, and up to 13 to 18 months for commercial scale operations. This really represents approximately half to 2/3 of the time it would take to purchase, receive, and set up new equipment on average. The exact time required for retrofitting can vary depending on the state of the equipment and its intended use in the production process, with refinishing the equipment often being one of the most time-consuming and labor-intensive steps. As we can see in this second figure, the availability of skills and expertise is also a critical factor in influencing the time and cost savings achieved through retrofitting. I think if we look through this, companies with the necessary skills to identify and source equipment and parts, have the know-how to modify or replace parts when necessary, able to handle the plumbing, the electrical setup, the welding, and also perform the necessary final testing, can really save themselves both time and money. However, lacking the all-important and relevant technical expertise increases the risk of incurring future cost disadvantages, making the option to buy new equipment more suitable for those people. In terms of cost savings, we present two cases here, both for biomass, one for solid state and the other for liquid state fermentation. These cases really illustrate the cost savings in capital expenditure that a successful retrofit can enable. As we can see, the cost savings at these early stages, either lab or demo, can save around 85% by using a mixture of utilizing both brownfield sites and retrofitted equipment. Though these are individual case studies that do not suggest that these levels of cost savings are guaranteed, they do highlight the potential of retrofit. And that really leads us on to really the third decision here. So if the decision is to your own facility, if the decision is to retrofit, then the final step within this decision framework is to understand what are the most likely parallel industries to source this used equipment or brownfield facilities from. And this will be evaluated in this next section. As part of this evaluation, we considered 7 industries that are often mentioned in discussions regarding retrofit. So breweries being one, wineries, ethanol plants, flavor houses, pharmaceuticals, and finally citric and malic acid facilities. And really in this evaluation, we can consider 2 broad criteria. One, process-related opportunities, and the second one being availability considerations. Just a little bit more detail here. So within process-related opportunities, we considered the upstream and downstream process similarity for protein fermentation, the retrofit complexity in terms of equipment compatibility, and industry-wide site characteristics such as proximity to suppliers, customers, utilities, logistics, and ability to co-locate. In the second criteria, the availability considerations really are based on the potential to secure a facility or equipment for retrofit, considering recent trends in those industries and market dynamics. Really, again, to highlight here, the findings from the previous decision, these retrofit opportunities are focused on biomass fermentation. In summary, we see that there's kind of 2 groups here. One group, breweries, wineries, and ethanol plants, make for 3 promising candidates for retrofit. And we'll go into a little bit more detail on this in just one second. Though the processes and equipment used in the other 4, so the second grouping there, can be considered more similar to that of fermentation-derived protein products, there is a lack of availability, and really this limits their viability for true candidates. We selected 2 examples to illustrate this point a bit further. Looking at breweries now. So within this evaluation, beer brewing industries arise as a promising parallel industry for retrofitting equipment. The widespread availability of idled and decommissioned equipment and facilities due to recent market dynamics makes breweries attractive options. The process-related similarities between fermenter equipment and low profit margins, which can be roughly around 2.2%, enhance the viability of retrofitting. Biomass fermentation experts have expressed great optimism in leveraging the current market dynamics to utilize existing brewery infrastructure for fermentation-derived production. We also see that large-scale multinational breweries are also directing their interest towards leveraging their assets and expertise to build out fermentation capacity for food production. One such example of this, as we have seen in the past, is the partnership between AB InBev and the Every Company. If we turn now to the other side of the coin, looking at enzymes manufacturers, here we really see that while fermentation facilities with high overlapping equipment to alternative protein production could be favorable for brownfield development and retrofit, and really this is based more on the process-related opportunities. If we look at the market availability or the market dynamics, the high profit margins they achieve with current operations are one of the factors that preclude them from being viable options. Increasing growth projections and steady demand also contribute to the view that these industries have low potential for providing availability capacity in the near future. If we look a bit further into this, for example, enzyme manufacturers here, many enzymes used in food and nutrition markets are fermented products. Enzyme producers exhibit the highest degree of process similarity in fermentation-derived product production and apply good manufacturing practices. The downstream processing also for enzyme involves isolating and purifying protein products. And this really, we do see providing overlap with precision fermentation for food protein, such as, and really here it's not only the downstream processing, but we also see aerobic and pressurized conditions within fermentation. However, really on the other side here, the industry's high margins and upward growth trend make the possibility of conversion or acquiring decommissioned equipment unlikely for the foreseeable future at least. And I think just finally here, to make the point, if these sites or equipment do become available, we often see that they're often in a state that is less than desirable, as this high specification equipment represents high upfront capex, and companies are likely to utilize it for the entire life cycle and then decommission once it's no longer usable. Looking at the final slide here for this section, really we see in summary, despite limitations in the use of facilities across the 7 industries, opportunities for brownfield development and equipment that can be retrofitted do exist and have proven to be technically and economically feasible options for expanding fermentation capacity. The 3 industries highlighted in this assessment, so breweries, ethanol plants, and wineries, show favorable process-related opportunities and market availability for brownfield development and retrofitting. Although the other 4 industries present certain advantages, limitations on the market availability make them less viable candidates. The decision to utilize brownfield developments and retrofit equipment for developing manufacturing capabilities needs to be evaluated really on a case-by-case basis though. Companies seeking more accessible opportunities are though likely to find greater success by targeting facilities and equipment from these 3 prioritized industries. That was it from the report. I'm now going to hand over to Adam, who's going to share with us the final conclusions and recommendations.
Thank you, Dom. And I'd like to extend another thank you to you and the integration team for a great analysis. And I'm happy to help wrap up our webinar today with our conclusions and recommendations from the analysis. In summary, there are at least 16 million liters of worldwide fermentation capacity, with about 50-50 split between owned fermentation capacity and contract manufacturer capacity. This is mostly concentrated in Europe and North America, and it's mostly concentrated at the commercial stage, meaning that there's the opportunities for worldwide distribution of new fermentation facilities, as well as pilot lab demonstration facilities that are needed to develop the rapidly growing sector of fermentation-derived alt protein products. This analysis identified 6 major decision points to influence your pathway towards a CMO contract or an owned facility. And there are many details within the report, but one of a few of the things that came out of that section, one is that staffing and expertise is an important requirement that influences the geography of a facility site choice and whether to leverage CMOs and the expertise therein. IP concerns could prevent some from using contract capacity, and this is something that could potentially be mitigated by CMOs. And finally, current financing needs are insufficient for large-scale capacity increases. As this industry matures, going from relatively small R&D costs to larger infrastructure costs will need different funding strategies. When we're thinking about actually building out facilities, we considered within this report whether retrofit equipment and sites were suitable for fermentation. And we found that biomass fermentation has the potential to use retrofit facilities and equipment to rapidly unlock capacity. And this is more aligned than is precision fermentation, where the complexities of the process make it generally incompatible with retrofit. Generally, retrofit can happen with expertise, but the efficiency of the retrofit tends to decrease along with the increasing scale of the intended facility. When we look at where the retrofit opportunities exist, there seems to be an interesting split where market opportunity drives the availability of candidate sites and equipment for retrofit, whereas technically overlapping equipment and sites are rarely available, either because they're used for the duration of their lifetime or because they're in markets where they enjoy relatively good economics. Partnering this analysis are two action papers that are published on the same website where you'll find the analysis. And the first action paper is directed towards members of the industry with a summary of the report, but also recommendations and actions to continue to expand out our fermentation capacity to develop fermentation-derived alternative proteins. There's many recommendations in here. I'll just highlight a few. One of them is that we really found here, when you look at the scales, that utilizing or considering CDMOs or CMOs in the early stages of process development, really through product commercialization, is a way to utilize an expertise workforce and potentially equipment that you may not be maximizing if you were to develop on your own at the pilot or demo scale. And there are, however, different pathways to manufacturing capacity increases depending on the type of fermentation, the format, and the bioprocess. For equipment manufacturers, one of the things that we did identify were the potential to create hardware that would address retrofit opportunities in what are now currently technically infeasible fermentation sites. So we have a market available ethanol facility. If there was hardware and then compatible microbes that would allow biomass fermentation to utilize those sites, we could see a rapid expansion of especially biomass fermentation. And finally, for CMOs worldwide, we suggest not just to make an analysis like this easier in the future, but really for all of the stakeholders involved, is to market your fermentation capacity and capabilities widely so that they can be recognized by potential customers, policymakers within your nations and regions, and within the value chain at large to help drive a more efficient process. Also partnering that action paper is one directed more towards policymakers. And one of the big themes that we can see is that there is an increase in fermentation-derived alternative protein companies and the potential for this industry to align with climate goals set out by many nations across the world. And if we were able to develop these efforts in coordination with efforts for clean energy, we can help reduce costs in many cases, but also sort of doubly cover climate goals set out by these nations and regions. We're also looking at policymakers to help establish innovative funding mechanisms to support domestic production, increase technical employment in their regions, and scale up fermentation-derived products. And then lastly, we also ask everybody to sort of help along with this census for analysis so that we can understand, but also nations and regions can understand national and regional fermentation opportunities and gaps to help develop and guide some of the things that this report found, is that there may be a mismatch with scale and there may be mismatches with geography in terms of the current state of fermentation. And we'd like to optimize that going forward. So lastly, I'd like to thank all of you for your attention today and your interest in the topic. You are now able to download this report at the web address here, and I think it'll be dropped in the chat. And we'll move on to our Q&A in just a moment, but I ask that if you do have questions, please put them in the Q&A tab and not the chat tab. That helps our team sort through all of these. So again, if you're looking for more opportunities and understanding of the alt protein space, please sign up for GFI's alt protein opportunity newsletter at gfi.org/insider. And I'll close out the slideshow now, and we'll move on to the QA. Thanks again. So Dom and Julian, we can have you hop back on if you'd like here, and we can begin the Q&A. Let's open this up. Looks like we have lots of questions.
So should I start here, Adam, if that's okay? Or
that would be great, yeah.
Perfect. So I saw one at the top there. So did you include mammalian cell culture producers as well as just fermentation? So just to be quite clear here, mammalian cell culture producers have not been included within the analysis. So I think, as you recall the slide, we did a step-by-step view. So we took the full universe for alternative protein companies, which is roughly around 3,000. And then we did several steps to filter them down, just focusing on biomass and precision fermentation focused companies. And really, when it got down to including somewhat similar companies, really it was a manual process of going company by company, really to understand what their focus was and what techniques they used. So important to recognize that we didn't use any mammalian cell culture producers within that analysis and the subsequent analysis you saw.
Great, thanks, Tom. I see a question here that I think was from relatively early on in the analysis. Have you considered beverage manufacturers like beer producers in the upper band? And I think this is an important question because one of the interesting things about this industry and potentially looking at any potential facility that could produce an alternative protein product right now, these types of facilities like an ethanol producing facility or a brewery would need to be extensively retrofit to meet the kind of GMP for food that they would need to do, but also to be fit for purpose for the organisms that go within there. So this is something that wouldn't readily match right now with the types of technologies that are available within those sites. However, as the parallel industry analysis suggested, with extensive retrofitting and then the potential for some new technologies or different biomass fermentation organisms or bioprocess designs, we could see them come online and add to that fermentation capacity we have now. All right. So
go on, Adam.
Yep, Dom, I think this is a question for you to ask. How can you elaborate on your estimated 0.4 to 2.8 million tons of alternative protein production potential, given that many fermenters are used for different approaches?
Perfect. Yes. So I think good question. And really that's part of one of the challenges of the exercise we did within this report. I think important to recognize we looked at the analysis from many different views, and I think one of these was to look at both the CMOs and the producers from the standard that they manufacture at. So when we include in this analysis, as you may recall, when we look at the lower bound estimates with the one we talk about for volumetric capacity and also used within the subsequent calculation for annual output in tons, here we really focused on food exclusive CMOs. And how do we know that? Is because within the databases we used, and again, where we didn't have this data in terms of manual research and an understanding of each of the companies, we were able to classify them based on the manufacturing standards that they were able to facilitate at their either with their equipment or within their facilities.
Thank you, Dom. A quick question here. Are the calculations for biomass fermentation also referring to microalgae? The facilities that we're looking at are facilities that would have the capability to grow microalgae in a standard fermenter and not in a photobioreactor type growth. So some of the biomass fermentation facilities that are photobioreactors could be within the own, but are not likely within the CMO space. All right, there's a question here at the top on hi all, please state what is the state of the art in terms of single or multi-strain microbial fermentation from the industry side. This is one that I can say we're still developing that state of the art. And I think one of the things that we saw here is that we can make lots of different calculations for the potential ranges of the fermentation output. But depending on the product that's being made, if you're making a precision fermentation product, depending on the platform and depending on the bioprocess, there can be a really wide scale of say your product titer at the end of a fermentation, or the product yield, depending on the amount of carbon input you have. So this range made this estimate sort of what we would consider a relatively conservative estimate. And if these numbers and this R&D were to continue and we're able to get better titers from these fermentations and some better carbon conversion, we can actually make use more effectively of some of the existing fermentation capacity we have. So while we're building all of our fermentation capacity here, we shouldn't overlook the fact that the research and development to continue developing alternative protein microbes is important.
Just seen one which looks like it's got a lot of votes here. So Bryce Rogers asks, how would recommend shopping for an appropriate CMO to partner with? Are simple Google searches sufficient, or is there more of an art to finding who's out there? And I think here, Bryce, really, as I mentioned at the start of the presentation, there are some quite good resources out there already that are aiming to consolidate CMOs, their capacity and their functionality. And I think that I can speak to both of them here as capacitors and capacitor and pilots for you. I think two very good resources that can be a base to this question, and really I think ever growing. And then I think it's also maybe part of the report as well of should you partner with a CMO or should you build your own facility? And I think then it becomes part of the six decision factors that we considered. And I think, yes, we applied it kind of at a report or industry level, but I also think they could be a useful base for any company assessing any of the decisions we've talked about today.
Great, thanks, Dom. I think there are two relatively highly upvoted questions that are rather parallel. One from Richard: what is the primary reason this industry has not taken off? Is it the cost of production, availability of feedstock, or something else? And then the next question: what did you uncover as the biggest barriers to cost reduction associated with scaling? Is it process engineering or innovation, or is it just scale factors? So I think these questions are both highly related. I think this industry is taking off, and what you're seeing here is sort of we are within this. So one of our calls for more lab pilot demonstration scale is to use improvements in bioprocess engineering and actually see some of these products go from what is essentially R&D scale to commercialization. And then once they're at commercialization, we want to be ready and have the right facilities in mind to be able to produce them at a reasonable cost. So there is available feedstock. We're always looking for new feedstocks to drive those costs down. The cost of production right now, I think that the scale factors will bring us to a lower cost. And this is something you see in almost every industry. There is overall in the bioeconomy for fermentation, a cost reduction associated with increasing the volume for each of these industries. And right now we're just starting to see very large scale facilities come on board. These facilities are likely going to use relatively standard feedstocks for a while, but on the horizon, we may be looking at alternative feedstocks like agricultural side streams. And there will be process engineering innovations that go into these facilities. And there will be new downstream processing units that may be more aligned with food production than pharma, which is where some of these technologies come from. So right now we're seeing all of this happening in real time, where you have process and technological and biological improvements along with scaling factors. Great. A comment here from Joachim Schultz: a new commercial facility for PF in 17 to 24 months sounds not realistic. On that figure, that was for biomass liquid fermentation. So that's with a reduced amount of downstream processing as compared to PF. PF is more complicated and takes more time. And obviously now there are different real world considerations compared to these simulations when we're looking at retrofit versus new, where there's production delays for manufacturers that might not be included in this model. I think the important thing to look at when the comparison between retrofit and new is made for that particular figure is to look at the difference there, sort of the 1/3 time savings rather than the raw numbers, which are relatively blue sky considering no delays or UPS strikes or anything like that. Guy Cooper writes, I'm surprised with the low production capacity at lab scale for startups, as a lot of the IP is generated at these stages and internal production capacity is closely linked with the ability to generate it. Yeah, I think that's a good question. And I think something that's really hard to capture is sort of the sub lab scale or just complete benchtop scale, where we're looking at strain development, where we're looking at somebody who might not be using something that closely mimics the bioprocess. It's really hard to count every flask and to count some of the 1 or 1.5 liter bioreactors that might sit benchtop. Those facilities and those research labs are an important part of strain development and media optimization and feedstock usage. But then when it starts to move to the lab for pilot type scale, that's where we're starting to capture what we're looking at here.
And I think here, just to add to this as well, Adam, yes, I think when you look at the view from a fermenter capacity, it does seem quite low. I think it's generally speaking, in terms of the scale of fermenter size that we're talking about here, obviously is significantly lower for this lab and bench scale. So yes, we see a lot of companies at this scale, but in terms of the overall capacity that they're able to generate, it's obviously certain magnifolds smaller than what you would expect with a commercial size facility.
All right. Oscar writes, different studies and assumptions have claimed we should massively increase our bioreactor capacity for precision and biomass fermentation for alternative proteins. Have you had contact with companies, e.g. Christian Hansen, to see whether they're investing in these expansions? So within the report, you'll see who's contributed to the report and who is able to speak with us regarding specifically capacity. We do engage with as many companies as would like to talk about the alternative protein space, either in biomass or fermentation. So any company that would like to speak to us about particular opportunities, whether they're on the R&D side or on the production side, are welcome to do so. So I just knowing, alternative proteins are a space that's getting a lot of attention. This is a space that requires a lot of capacity because we're making products for food. If you're making an enzyme, you're making something that may exist in just a few units per mil in a reaction. If you're making a food product, this may be something that's 1 to 5% or more of a final consumer product good. So all of the capacity that could go into this will be important. Eduardo asks, we're a company situated in Santiago, Chile. How does the geographic situation of a precision fermentation company influence the decision of retrofit or a new plant, as well as CMO or proprietary? Dom or Julian, would you like to comment on that one?
Yes, of course. I think this is maybe great to use the example like Chile, but I think this can be used for any facility or across the world. I really think when it talks to understanding whether you want to build your own facility or partner with a CMO, I think really here, when you're considering about a facility in both of those categories, really you want to look for a trade-off. And that trade-off has to really consider feedstock, so proximity to feedstock, proximity to talent. So really people working in these facilities, working on the problems that you have within your company. And then obviously proximity to the markets as well. So where the people are that are going to buy your products. And I really think those, yes, you consider for each decision, CMO or build new. But I think important to recognize that with the build new option, you also have the flexibility to pick where your trade-offs lie most. So yes, you always have to consider those kind of 3 main options. And I hope that answers your question, Eduardo. But I think that's not only applicable to Chile, but I think it's applicable to everywhere in the world.
Thank you, Dominic. Next question from Benjamin. The Leavenworth that was upvoted. What is the total market opportunity for fermentation that's currently unmet? So I think this goes a little bit back to what we were talking about, fermentation and especially precision fermentation being a really nascent field. So when we're looking at the potential for precision fermentation to generate animal-free dairy proteins or animal-free egg proteins, or a variety of other foodstuffs that came originally from other sources, oils potentially that were palm oil or coconut oil that could potentially be made at scale in fermentation. The unmet demand can come really from any of those places as we start to find more sustainable options within fermentation to produce these. So that's why actually capturing a number to say this is what we could do. You could imagine all of these things being drop-in replacements from fermentation products. And on the biomass side, we are still seeing new biomass protein products come out. So the diversity of which that industry is capable of producing and the formulations that they can go in, I think we're still scratching the surface. Thanks. I think you could handle the next one, Dom. Yeah.
Yeah, no, I saw on here. So CMOs are going to be jumping hand over foot to get involved. Cost to use CMO may go down to zero, most especially if the producer is willing to co-brand. Any thoughts? And I think this is an interesting hypothesis. I think overall, we're quite a long way there in terms of addressing that risk. But I do think, if hypothetically we do get to the point where CMO capacity isn't abundant, I really think it's got to consider that it's not just the capacity when we're talking about CMO. It's not just purchasing a fermenter. It's also the expertise that go along with running this type of facility, especially when we talk about bridging the valley of death, going from lab to demo to commercial. And really, this expertise is perhaps not as readily available as just buying a fermenter. So I do think that perhaps this risk of the competitive nature of CMO and whether it's worth setting up a CMO is a long way off. And I think really within the report itself, we do highlight, particularly in the first phase, in the short to midterm, a real need for lab and demo scale CMOs out there. I think it's a good question, good hypothesis, but I think we're quite a long way there.
Yeah, and I think what would be interesting to look specifically for that question into other industries where sort of like the partnership with third-party manufacturing is more mature, is that of course there are different sort of partnerships that could be coming out of this dependency between with the CMO, meaning that it could be about co-investing. It could be about long-term partnerships. There's a lot of opportunities out there to sort of partner up with CMOs and sort of have a win-win situation to build capacity together, either by co-branding, co-investment, joint projects, joint R&D, all of these things. I think here, as we're not so mature in this industry here yet, there's a lot that we can look into other industries where these partnerships have been running for decades and years, where we can see where the journey could go in this direction.
Great, thank you. I see there's a question here. When we say 16 billion liter capacity, how much % of that is pure protein? I'd ask you to take a look at the report and you'll be able to see some of our assumptions and how we came up with our range. Obviously for a biomanufacturing production, the efficiency of the process, the uptime versus downtime, and lots of things like that impact. So some assumptions had to be made, and you can read about our model within. Drew Patel asks, is there a lack of equipment fabricators in this space? Design, reaction vessels, etc. There's improved bioreactors, downstream processing equipment, and lots of equipment that is now more fit for purpose than it was certainly 5 or 6 years ago for precision fermentation, for protein extraction, or for fats and oils from microbial fermentation. So this is something people are starting to pay more attention to. And I think as we see more attention paid to the industry, more equipment manufacturers are looking specifically at this space to help identify what are the right downstream processing equipment, what's the right bioreactor design for precision fermentation, for biomass. And we're seeing more of that coming on, but there's always room for innovation here. Gemma asked a question also about bioprocess. What do you see as the main levers to unlock lower cost fermentation? Is it going to be continuous versus batch, feedstock optimization? This is a great question, but this is also one of these grand challenge questions where there's a lot to do. We could certainly devote time to getting better bioprocesses in feedstock optimization to get lower cost side streams that could be agricultural starches, that could be bioprocessed into glucose, and use those. If you use something that might not be as optimum for a microbe for speed, like a sucrose or a starch or trisaccharide or something like that, it might slow down the bioprocess. And so understanding how to keep that bioprocess moving fast enough so that you don't lose money elsewhere in terms of electricity or water or heat or cooling, those are the types of things that would have to be weighed out. And continuous versus batch, this will also highly depend on the bioprocess. Can it be kept from being contaminated? Is it an organism that's able to produce that product or continue to increase in biomass for as long as you want it to? So all of these innovations will help, but they're also pretty context specific as well. Antonello Lodato asked another question along those lines. What's the unit operation in a typical purification process that's the current bottleneck for cost and productivity? We can do better, I think, in a OpEx as an industry for achieving the titers that we want in upstream processing and in downstream processing. So both have room for improvement. And again, it's going to be bioprocess, organism, and product specific and that makes it difficult to generalize. Okay. Jacob Schultz. Yep. Sorry. Dom, why don't you?
Yeah, I was going to add that one as well. So there are also amino acid companies closing down. DSB does not match for precision fermentation, but upstream is well suited, not shown in your report. I think here there's a factor of how many industries we evaluated. So we did limit it to 7. I think you can find similarities within other industries from the ones we did select. And I think to your question, amino acid companies, yes, I think could well offer some opportunities for retrofit. But I think just we had to limit ourselves in terms of the scale of that operation and the assessment. But I think a good question and important to recognize other opportunities do lie outside of those 7 as well.
Thank you. Bremke Van Es asks, 2.8 million tons of protein, what's the nutritional versus functional amount? For some of that captured capacity, that's going to be biomass fermentation, where the dried amount may be a portion where there's also fiber or some fats that go along with that. In precision, we're looking at the a relatively pure protein as far as we can get it from a bioprocess, something like 95%. So if you want to dig into the report, you can see sort of the split for where we have some of those calculations, and hopefully that will help make sense. Adina Brandt asks, would retrofitting not require significant expertise and personnel investment to get the wizards needed to retrofit the equipment? I don't foresee that as a smooth turnkey solution.
Yeah, I think this is a very good point. And I think it's one we emphasized as well in the presentation and in the report, that one of the big challenges when it comes to retrofit, it really is finding the right level of expertise. And I don't think it's just one person. It's not one wizard. It's a bit of a fellowship, I think, there, really finding the right expertise in terms of both planning the retrofit, but also executing upon it as well. So it's not just one size fits all within that. And I think it is one of the big challenges that retrofit does face. I think it's a good question and something to keep an eye on as well.
And just to add on to that and sort of labor and expertise is something that we heard about over and over again in this report. I think for policymakers out there and for people who are interested in the training for this nascent industry, bioprocess engineering, plant operators, and lots of folks who can come into this industry and then work through it and gain experience and then maintain that is going to be really vital. And that actually was a decision for geography, where you can get good candidates from good training programs and opportunities. And hopefully we'll see more training programs and more degree granting programs that are specifically associated with fermentation expertise.
Just to add another side point that to as well, Adam, one of the analysis that unfortunately didn't make it into the report, we did look at some of the job postings that companies were listing for at the moment. And really one of the ones which was right at the top were bioprocess engineers. And I think really, there's a hot market for that kind of talent at the moment.
Great. We're just about getting to the end of our time. So I'm looking here at a question we can answer quickly. I think there's a question here about the risks involved in precision fermentation at lab and commercial scale. I think one of the things that we identified is this is transitioning from R&D and having a process that may work on the bench to a process that may work in a multi-100,000-liter reactor or in a scaled out facility with many smaller reactors. That is a challenge. And one of the real needs for the industry is to work on these types of facilities that can shepherd a bioprocess and a production through those scales to make it so it's successful. So we learn about what the organism needs to efficiently produce. And that's how bioprocess is really set up to do these incremental scalings so that this can be successful. So it is a stepwise de-risking that hopefully once you get out of lab scale and you see that something has potential, you can find a way to make it work at commercial scale and make the necessary improvements.
Sorry, I'm seeing one here from Craig Johnson. So commercial scale liquid biomass retrofit at around 30%. I believe you're referring to the slider image here, and that just looks a bit too high. Is the graphic indicative only or also includes partial retrofit? And I think really here, just with the slider diagrams in general, so we had one for the decision to build your own facility or go with a CMO. And obviously the one you're referring to here is to look at retrofit versus new. And really these aren't a quantitative analysis. This is really more indicative of the conversations we had, again, from a compilation of those 30 plus contributors. And I think I'd maybe like to take the opportunity to thank all of those because they really provided a very valuable input to the report.
Thank you, Dom. And with that, we'll close today. And we want to thank all of you for your attention and your interest in this industry and in our report. You'll be able to find the report online at the link provided. And yeah, we'll close here. And thank you all for your time. And we'll be able to answer any questions and follow up. Thank you.
Thank you very much.